this new Jim Crow?
Yeah. So, one of the things that I've been strictly focused on is how do we ensure that everyone has the right to vote, especially Black and brown communities. And what we have noticed is that there are states across the country that are moving with great haste to turn back the clocks to what you just described is the Jim Crow type of era. Listen, I think that we have to do all that we can to not allow this to happen. I very much think that we must support the For the People Act that is currently in the U.S. Senate. It is stalled in the U.S. Senate. We must also support the John Lewis Voting Rights Act, speaking of Georgia, that is also stalled right now in the U.S. Senate. These two bills, they will help us ensure that Black and brown people have the right to vote, but also all Americans. I can't think of anything more American than having a constitutional right to vote. And protecting that right to vote is paramount.
We are also back with Troy Prestwood. It's a pleasure to have both of you. Troy is a political commentator from Washington, D.C. Troy, the senator makes a very good point. Wild Bill Hickok and Jesse James running through the streets is the wild, wild west. And yet we're seeing it play front and center in reality television in our communities across the country. And most of them happen to be communities of color. What do you say about the legislation? What is it going to take to get people to do the right thing with some common sense gun laws, particularly, Troy, the legislation that we see going on in Texas, that anyone now can buy a gun?
Yeah. I used to spend my summers in Texas, Houston in particular, and I can tell you that's where I learned how to fire a gun as well, because Texas has a really big gun culture there, and I'm not surprised where we're at today. It is a sad commentary, though, that anyone can buy a gun. Let me just say this, though. In Black and brown communities across the country, and especially here in cities like Washington, D.C., we do have an epidemic of gun violence. And today, at least, we know that in the past, the opposition has blocked the CDC, which people forget. There's a P at the end, which is prevention. They blocked them from even studying what's happening with gun violence in our country. Now, with Biden in the White House, we are at least looking at this as a disease and trying to come to the root cause of what's causing it so that we can do the hard work to try to solve this problem. But I am all for common sense gun legislation. I think it has broad bipartisan support across the country, no matter if you talk to Democrats or Republicans, even if you're in the NRA. Those members also feel that we should have common sense gun legislation. What we need are some courageous senators. That's what we're missing. People who are willing, senators who are willing to do the right thing and bring this legislation to the floor so that we can once again protect our children, protect communities, protect mothers. I mean, come on.
I mean, what Donald Trump did is exactly what Rutherford B. Hayes did in the election with Samuel James Tilden back in the 1800s. And what Hayes did, he had a meeting with the southern states in a black hotel in Washington, D.C.
He's dropping some history right there.
I appreciate that. Some history right there, Troy. And when we dig down deep into the history, you go back to Frederick Douglass and how so many presidents actually would travel across to Southeast Washington, to Anacostia, to actually talk to him. But they did the job. They did the work they were supposed to do. They would go talk to one of the leading black men of his time. And now we find that Republicans are no longer talking to us. They're doing what they've done historically through Reconstruction and Jim Crow. They're sidestepping us and not dealing with us face to face and earning our vote. What would be your message, Troy, to the Republicans there on Capitol Hill? We see that Mitch McConnell is drilling down and doubling down and saying debunk racism. Talk to me about it. What are you getting from Mitch McConnell and the Republicans?
You just so happen to mention Anacostia, and I live in Anacostia, and right around the corner from the Frederick Douglass House. And so it has very big significance and meaning to me and to us who live here. Let me just say this. Our politics is broken. All the politics in this town just broken, especially on Capitol Hill. I'm old enough to remember a time when it was Tip O'Neill and Ronald Reagan, you know, and they all, you know, they fought like hell, but they at least worked to get something done for the American people. Now everyone is in their corners
because they cared about the
and
American
they won't come
people.
out and play.
They cared about the American
precisely.
people.
Well, sure, and in some ways they did. Other ways, you know, we can argue that. But I think what we do see right now is that everyone is in their respective corners and they won't come out and play in the sandbox. It's very childish.
Yeah.
What I'm hoping we can do is get some courageous members of Congress in the Senate or in the House. I know there's a bipartisan group that's working in the Senate that can help, you know, push meaningful legislation forward, especially the George Floyd Policing Act, the For the People
Absolutely.
Act, the Voting Rights Act, the D.C. Statehood Bill. We need to meet in the middle. And I know that the state senator said that politics is the art of compromise, and that's very true. But if you're not even talking to one another, then where's the compromise? So we have to work harder and smarter to bring people to the table. And if we can't bring you to the table, I think it's time to think about brute force.
All right.
The state senator said it earlier. It may be time to reform that
Troy.
filibuster.